Hello, Matt. It's absolute pleasure to have you with us for this conversation. Thank you so much for taking time off for this.
Absolutely, Rajiv. Happy to do so. Thanks for having me.
Well, Matt, we have interacted in the past, and you've shared content on your great initiative, which is ChargeEuropa. If you look at the EV global market, which is estimated at about 388 billion, is forecasted to touch something like $950 billion by the year 2030, which is a phenomenal growth. I think at a CAGR, it's about 13 to 15%, which is quite impressive. Along with this growth of EV market, there is a commensurate growth expected with regard to the EV charging station networks. And you are already having your business in that space. You have your EV charging networks with DH screens on them. So with this kind of a background, what has been your experience thus far in this particular business?
Look, I think it's really exciting to look at the CAGR, the market size, and see the potential and how fast it's growing. It kind of depends who you speak to, right? When you look at the EV charging infrastructure sector, you've got EV charging as a service, which actually is significantly smaller than the EV charging infrastructure market, because you're essentially providing a service, which is energy. In our case, and your case as well, right? It's not just energy, you're also providing an advertising service. So you can also add the digital out-of-home sector to that market size when you're doing the EV charging as a service market. But most of the players that you speak with are essentially hardware providers. So these are the guys that sell you the charger and the screen, and those are the guys that are doing this big monster, 200 plus billion market size. When it comes to CAGR, yeah, I mean, the growth is big. 15% is pretty reasonable to say. When it comes to Europe, that's a number that is very realistic, but it's also because you simply don't have a lot of infrastructure in the ground yet. So going from 0 to 10 is already monster growth, right? So it's a great number. We're very excited to be in it, and the industry so far has been very good to us in that when we jumped in this market, which was back in, officially it was 2017, is when we put our first prototype into the ground and connected it to the grid and started providing advertising services to our first big customer. We really started to actively roll out our network commercially in 2018, 2019. We did a big pilot in Warsaw in 2020 that I think you guys covered, and we appreciate your interest in that. So yeah, to give you just a quick summary, Rajiv, it's a market that's growing. There's huge potential, but right now we talked about this before, right? That S curve, and I think we're sort of close to that inflection point, at least in the more mature markets like Europe, where we see that a lot of work, energy that's been put in over the last 2-3 years is now paying off, because all the seeds that you put in, so all the conversations you have with prime locations, whoever wins this game is essentially the company that has the best locations. So all the energy and effort that we've put in over the last few years, speaking with these commercial properties, places that people either shop, eat, or work at, are now paying off, since even you're riding these kind of tailwinds where there is a mandate overall in the European Union to have EV charging at commercial properties. So now we can see that S curve is at the inflection point, and that the market is showing us some love, and we get to grow and issue a bunch of nice press releases for you guys to hopefully send out as well.
Well, wonderful to hear that the market is showing some love for you. Matt, tell us, your business is based in Poland, but what are your plans for Europe as a market?
So if you look at the European market, you could basically kind of draw a line close to the middle, I would say. Our focus is primarily the CEE region, which is Central Eastern Europe. So anything kind of east of Germany, so Germany and east of Germany is where our focus is. One of the main reasons being is that Western Europe has done a fairly good job. They're kind of ahead of the curve in deploying EV charging infrastructure, and they're doing it, right? So what we've decided to focus on is that sort of earlier stage market, places where EV charging is maybe not in high demand, but we know it will be in high demand. Kind of a first mover kind of entry, if you will. So a lot of the conversations that we have in Central Eastern Europe with properties or with cities, municipalities, are usually the first or second conversation that they'll be having about this kind of thing. That's the reason why we're also here talking to you, right? Is because we put screens on our chargers. And digital out of home is usually a market. It's a business that is quite strong in Central Eastern Europe. So when we jump into these markets, Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, Croatia, these are markets where we can hit the ground running, right? You secure advertising contracts for the screens, and when you deploy an asset in the ground that provides EV charging, it's already generating an income because you have the advertising revenue. So that's, when it comes to the region that we're targeting, these are areas where we don't see a lot of EV charging infrastructure yet. So the barriers to entry are quite low. We don't have a lot of competition. But because of that strong digital out of home, I mean, you guys are in India and you're covering advertising and the media industry. So that's already a good sign for us, right? It means, okay, there's a healthy market for digital out of home, for advertising services, for media services. Let's focus on entering those markets since we see huge growth potential for the EV charging component down the line.
Marvelous. Matt, I've largely seen your media in the retail environment. Are you entirely focused on the retail environment, or do you see opportunities in non-retail environments as well?
When it comes to the residential market space for EV charging infrastructure, that's usually a business that's fairly well catered to by hardware suppliers. Okay. So you're going to have a producer that makes an EV charger, right? And they're going to most likely sell it online. If you buy an electric car, maybe you'll also get a charger with the deal that you do. There's a small space for that kind of service provider in those areas. You do have an attractive market in Poland. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you why. Essentially, the former Soviet republics of the satellite states, so not just the USSR, but also everything up to basically Eastern Berlin. Communists really like to build multifamily home buildings in the city centers, but they didn't really focus on, back then, making sure that there would be ample parking space for people that lived in these buildings. Because, hey, the proletariat didn't need to have vehicles. They needed to walk to work or take the bus. Right. So when you ask that question, are we looking at residential? No, primarily focus on commercial properties, which is where the biggest advertising revenues are. However, we are exploring several partnerships with municipalities that have residential or large residential communities, specifically for multifamily home buildings. So in Poland, in Polish, those buildings are called bloki, which kind of, it comes from English almost like a block, like a big concrete block with windows in it. And we are putting up charging stations in those public spaces because cities want to provide their residents with EV charging, especially in congested areas where people don't have their own private place to charge. So at a city street corner where you'll have a number of residential buildings is where you will see our chargers. And we still get that advertising revenue because usually the charger will be highly visible for not just people living at the building, but since it's at the street corner, everyone driving past, walking past that charger, that's going to be an impression for us.
Absolutely, Matt. Charging technology is fast evolving and you get fast chargers, and we do not know what all is going to be happening in this particular space in the coming years. Now, how much does that impact your business really?
Well, not really, since we're essentially a service provider, we're technology agnostic. So we work with the best component suppliers to provide us with the top off-the-shelf charger components for our chargers. We do make our own hardware, but it's essentially, we're an integrator. Everyone today likes to call themselves a producer. At the end of the day, you're either integrating existing off-the-shelf parts from third-party suppliers, or you, by some amazing chance, have an entire production line in your office or in your warehouse, which is rarely the case. So yes, the industry is changing quickly, and our job is to stay at the forefront of those. So you'd be surprised how much time charge point operator spends working with suppliers, figuring out what the best components are and the most future-proof solutions to make sure that whatever asset you deploy in the ground essentially has a competitive technological edge for as long as possible.
Matt, how has the response been from the advertisers, and what category of advertisers are preferring the formats that you offer?
When it comes to the advertising part of the business, it's surprisingly easier than we thought it would be. We thought that we would spend a lot of time convincing brands to buy ad space on our chargers, but what we've seen is that classic, build it and they will come approach. So if you've got a good location with a strong impression rates, a strong level of impression rates, most brands will want to be on your screens. And the fact that the fact that brands are able to purchase space on essentially what would be considered a sustainable medium. So an EV charger providing clean energy, it's almost a tailwind in this type of conversation. They prefer to be on something like that as opposed to a typical plastic billboard on the back of a diesel bus, for example, right? So the advertising industry has been significantly more good to us and easier for us to penetrate than the challenging energy infrastructure market.
In terms of the advertising, the content or the creative part, what kind of messaging usually happens on a format like this? Are brands preferring it for their brand building and for highlighting their green approach, or are there also brands that see this as a consumer engagement opportunity driving sales?
Everything, Rajiv. It's no surprise. A lot of car brands are buying ad space from us because there's the EV angle. So that's a market that's in very high demand, and we can see that it's mainly to increase awareness that these companies are not only producing EVs, but they're also financially supporting the infrastructure that charges them. One thing to note is that we can see that they've been very creative in this space. This is a campaign that's been completed, so I'm able to talk to you about it. But Opel from Stellantis Group recently promoted one of their EVs, and the fact that our screens are touchable, we have touch screens built into our EV charging stations. They decided to make an interactive ad. So there'd be a loop of like a 30-second video playing of some new exciting EV that they're launching. But as soon as the video ends, there's a sign that says, touch me to learn more. You touch the screen. After you touch the screen, you learn a bit more about the car by learning about different features of it. But at the end, they actually invite you to leave some type of contact, either your email or a phone number. And I tested this myself because I was curious. So I went up to the charger, tested it out, and 30 seconds later, they'll call you and they say, hey, we heard, Matt, that you interacted with this ad and you wanted us to contact you. Judging on where you interacted with that station, our dealership is located only 10 minutes, drive from there. We invite you to test drive that car tomorrow afternoon. Would that suit you? And you kind of say, all right. So I can see that also lead generation has been something that brands have been exploring. But the final thing that we see pretty often is simply just the fact that since these are basically large mobile phones, right? The same ratio, 16:9, you'll just see a lot of omni-channel ads. The regular ads that are online, the regular ads that they put onto billboards and onto your Instagram will pop up on our screen. So that's pretty nice to see.
Oh, Matt, does this also come into programmatic advertising?
Yeah, our chargers are programmatic ready. When we were putting look, I'm not the advertising expert. We have some other people that are much smarter than I am that are dealing with this. But what I can tell you is that our mandate was to basically have the Rolls Royce of advertising, of digital out-of-home advertising. So I know that we invested heavily into high quality programmatic ready components. So the software, the audience measurement platform that uses a bunch of sensors, including some type of webcam, cameras that detect your facial expressions and your reactions and the length, how long you look at a screen, for example, basically means that we're very well positioned to provide programmatic services in the future. It's still early, and I've heard a lot of mixed opinions on how fast it's going to grow. But one thing we wanted to do is simply secure that place for ourselves in the future, so that when the assumption is that it does take off, we're the guys to go to for it.
Marvelous. Matt, in terms of your experience or engaging with planners, buyers, and advertisers, what has your experience been? Do you engage directly with brand advertisers, or how are the agencies looking at your format?
Once again, it's a bit of everything. Sometimes we're approached by big brands that have a specific campaign where they think that our screens are going to be suitable for the medium that they want to release. And that's usually a much more intense conversation, because it's usually some type of custom job that we have to test and make sure that it works before we roll it out into the other stations. And when it comes to the agencies or the intermediaries, those are fairly standard conversations. What's your format, 16:9, locations, and what's the estimated impression rates? Boom, and they're pros, right? It's their job is to do it, right? They provide you with the pipeline. So it's actually been very nice working with these specialists that focus on primarily selling advertising space, because yeah, there's never an empty month that way. There's always some money at the end of the month in the account.
Beautiful. In terms of content, how much of dynamic content runs on this format?
So by dynamic content, you're asking like moving images,
That's right, full motion.
stuff like that. I would say, from what I've seen personally, we would have around 80% being static, and the 20% being dynamic, or something that is sort of more catered towards the sort of the digital out of home medium, as opposed to just a typical static billboard.
Right.
That number is changing though, and I know for a fact that a lot of brands are looking at doing more and more of these dynamic ads and moving ads. So perhaps next year I'll be able to, go from 80-20 to maybe a more exciting number.
Great, absolutely great. Matt, my final question. You've accumulated some serious experience in this particular space, and if you were to suggest 2 to 3 things to really watch out for any business that is entering the area of DOH advertising on EV charging networks, what would they be like?
Oh, good Lord. Some of the advice that we could give. I think everyone has their own kind of experience depending on the market that they're active in, right? The guys in the US are working in a fairly developed market where you have all different kinds of financing options available to you. In Europe, we focus more on the more traditional types of financing. And in the sort of emerging markets, I would say the exciting VC sources of money are a good way to start your business. But my advice is definitely have foresight into what's going to happen in 1 or 2 years. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because even though the entire world is moving to EV, in order to be able to make sure that you're best positioned to do so, it's not just a case of, hey, we've got a great idea, we've got some financing, let's do this. You got to make sure that your tech is really up to spec. You'd be surprised how many big, massive companies, even competitors of ours that are 10 times bigger, struggle to maintain a healthy and reliable EV charging network. That's key. And then finally, be okay with the idea that the energy infrastructure market is slower moving than the advertising market. So you have a lot of people that are active in developing and growing business in the advertising space that are used to doing deals within a few weeks time, a couple of months time. Energy infrastructure space, people deal in quarters and years, just so you know. So you got to be in this for the long haul. And you really have to love the energy space, to be familiar with it in order to maximize that advertising play that you want to use. A good example, I think, is I'm not sure if you guys have it in India. You have it in quite a few places in Europe as well as the US. Advertising for infrastructure is a pretty common way to finance whatever type of infrastructure you're doing. In Europe, there's a well-known company, you've probably heard of them, called JC&Co. These guys kind of spearheaded this idea of combining advertising with some free infrastructure for the city. So street furniture, bus station shelters, even public bathrooms. These are financed primarily by advertising. It's costing the city nothing, and by having a private company do it, the bus stations are always clean. Everything is always up to spec, and that's essentially what we're doing, right? It's the 2.0 version of that. So instead of doing bus shelters, you do EV charging and clean energy infrastructure. So yeah, I think that would be the summary to give you. It's a rocky road, but it's an exciting one, and anyone looking to jump into this space should definitely explore it. But simply be aware of the change in dynamics between traditional energy infrastructure and digital out of home, media, and combining those two and being comfortable with that.
Fantastic. Great insights, Matt, and great advice too. I think it's been an amazing experience for me talking to you today on this particular segment, and I'm absolutely certain that there are going to be great many heights that your organization will scale and set an example in this particular segment. We wish you the very best for your onward journey, and thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and looking forward to chatting again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Matt.